people will complain about things they can't change, like traffic and weather, but every day put up with things they can change, like a bad job or a bad relationship. Hello again. Welcome to the Ruthless Truth. I am your host, Truth Davis. In this forum, I provide my thoughts, opinion, truths on a various range of topics based on what I consider a unique life experience. There could be a wide range of topics addressed, although I will rarely discuss sports or politics because you can pretty much get that anywhere. So, general format is talk a little bit about maybe some early trends, things that are going on in the country. Then I'll really focus on what is today's truth, the topic I'll go a little deeper on. And then I always like to end with a little fun fact from U.S. American history. So, interesting thing happened last week. I was watching television and I saw a commercial that actually had an intraracial couple, intraracial family, meaning everybody in the family were from the same race. And that was a little surprising because if the only thing you knew about America was based on watching consumer commercials, you think over 50% of all households or marriages were interracial, because that's what you see in commercials all the time. It proliferates. And just so you know, the actual percentage is 19%. So why? Why do we see so many interracial couples in advertising? Well, let me tell you what it isn't. It's not because of DEI or some effort of wokeness. You know, these companies spend hundreds of thousands of dollars producing these commercials and then spend an additional millions of dollars to run them. So that's too much money and investment to be trying to make a social point. No, these people are trying to sell products. Okay. So the reason they do it is because they want to get your attention. Okay? Please know, there is nothing in a commercial that's unintentional. Anything you see was considered. If there's a bookshelf in the background, there was discussion and decisions about every item that's on that bookshelf. That's why to shoot a 30-second commercial, it takes 10 to 14 hours, if not more, because there's so much attention paid to detail. And one of the things I've always loved about advertising is there's no room for political correctness. As I said, there's too much money being invested to not tell the truth. I remember once there was a recommended actress for a commercial and I rejected her. And the agency was why? I said, she's too hot. It's like, what? I'm like, she's too hot. All right. You want the actors to be pleasant and appealing, but you don't want them to be a visual distraction. I was like, we run the commercial with her. Guys won't even hear our commercial message because they're too focused on her. You know, another time there was a guy that they really liked because he was funny and the commercial needed a funny guy, but he was morbidly obese. And I said no, because he is visually distraction. And finally, advertising is a copycat league. Okay. If one company starts something and gets a little success, then everyone else tries it. And that's what you see going on today. About a decade ago, it seemed like half the commercials you saw featured actors with red hair, even though redheads only make up 4% of the population. One little additional fun fact, the rarest human on earth is a redhead with blue eyes. They make up less than 1/5 of 1% of the population. But in advertising, it was visually stunning and attractive, so you saw a lot of it. That said, I do love when great advertising is rewarded. A few years ago, Dr. Pepper launched an ad campaign called Fans Feel, and it's heavily focused during the college football season. I think it's great. I think it's innovative, and they've been rewarded because this year, Dr. Pepper moved into number 2 behind Coca-Cola, best-selling soft drink in America. Okay? Sprite's 3rd, Pepsi's 4th. All right. In my last podcast, episode 3, I focused on risk-taking in the workplace. And I talked about it in a couple of ways. I talked about taking risk in your current job, and then also putting your job at risk if you just decide to leave. And I got to tell you, I got a lot of feedback from that episode, and most of it was, hey, you really painted that as a black and white issue, which is a little simplistic. There's a lot of gray. There are a lot of other factors that go in people deciding whether or not to take risk in their current job or to change jobs. And as I considered that, I said, that's probably true. So think of today's truth as kind of a follow-up, an expansion on that thing. So to today's truth, I want to talk about work again, a little differently. So no matter what you do for a living, unless you are your own boss, you work for yourself, then you have a boss. And additionally, no matter how nice the culture and the environment is, there are elements that you'll find stressful, all right? Or annoying, or just downright aggravating. No one loves everything about their job. But the question is, today's truth question is, how much crap, how much shit are you willing to put up at work to keep your job? Is there a breaking point, and how do you know you get there? Because we all have to put up with a little bit of it. Now, I've been fortunate that I pretty much enjoyed every job I've had. I wanted the position. I'm glad that I got it. But there are always going to be bad days. So work is hard when you enjoy it. I can't imagine what it's like to get up every day and go to a job you hate. I've always found it surprising, somewhat ironic, that people will complain about things they can't change, like traffic and weather, but every day put up with things they can change, like a bad job or a bad relationship. So we all have to deal with crap at work. Okay, that's just part of the job. But how much are you willing to put up with? Well, apparently for most people, they're willing to put up with quite a lot. In a recent survey by Pew Research, 38% of workers were dissatisfied with their job. Now, I guess you could look at it on the positive side and say over 60% of people are satisfied with their job. And that dissatisfaction, for the most part, falls into three categories. And I don't think they'll be surprising. The first one is compensation and benefits. Am I paid enough? Do I feel like I'm making enough? The second one is advancement opportunities. Is there anywhere for me to go in this company? What are my growth opportunities? And then the last one is workplace environment. And this is usually related to their relationship with their boss, but it could also apply to the overall environment. And, when it gets really bad, people will refer to that as toxic. I know my very first job, age 16, I worked at a local fast food restaurant in Memphis, and my manager was very disrespectful. He used racial slurs and slights. One time I was mopping the floor and he told me I was a discredit to my race because of how poorly I was mopping the floor. Okay. At that point I spoke up. I said, this is just a summer job for me. This is your career. And one day I'm going to be a millionaire and I'll come back and I'll let you drive me around as my chauffeur. I was 16 when I said that. Didn't get me fired, but it did back him up a little bit. Look, as I said, there's a certain amount of BS that comes with the job. You just have to take self-inventory and determine how much of it you're willing to put up with. It's hard to know when you reach your breaking point because most people can't afford to go very long without a paycheck. Most people can't afford to miss one check. And your boss and your organization, they know that, all right? Also, the overwhelmingly majority of workers want to and try to do a really good job. They believe in the organization and they are loyal. But if you don't take away anything else from this discussion, please know this. Your first responsibility is to yourself. Make sure you think about what's best for you versus what's best for the company. Companies rely on employees who care and want to give 100% to the organization. But don't ever lose sight of this. If it ever comes down that the organization have to make a choice between what's best for the company and what's best for the employees, they will choose what's best for the company every time. Every time. Okay, that said, you got to also kind of be honest with yourself. Are you really being disrespected? Are you really being honest about how much you're truly contributing? It's totally fine to have self-confidence and demand you get recognized and rewarded for what you bring to the table, but you need to also guard against being impatient and unrealistic in your expectations. I'm going to give you one example from each sides of this equation, and both examples are from my time at LifeLock. When I joined LifeLock, it was a startup, and one of the first things I needed to do was build out a full marketing team. One of the positions that I needed to fill was media director. This is the role that plans and executes how we should spend our advertising dollars, which we're about to significantly increase. It answers questions like, how much should we spend on TV versus online? Are we better off being on TNT versus ESPN? Those type of things. It's a very data-driven role and a very analytical role combined with strategy and leadership. So it's a pretty important role. Well, at that time, the media was being managed by Whitney, a very smart, capable manager. But she was somewhat inexperienced. She was probably 27 years old. She was well paid for her position, and I had total confidence in her that she was only going to get better and become a true media professional. And I told her that. I'm like, Whitney, you're doing a great job. But she was offended when she found out that I had put out this search for this media director role. She felt that she could do the job. And I was trying to explain to her, well, look, this job's about to get a lot bigger because we're about to start spending a lot more money than we ever have spent before. And I needed someone with a proven track record of managing a big bucket. And her point was, I'm doing the job now. I read the job description. It looks just like my job. And then I thought I came up with one of the most insightful, persuasive arguments I've ever made. So here's what I said to her. I said, Whitney, every high school football team has a quarterback. Every college football team has a quarterback. Every NFL team has a quarterback. And if you look at the job description for quarterback, it reads the same for all three of those roles. But do you think a high school quarterback could start for the Eagles? No, because there's a certain amount of time, experience, failure, growth, and development for you to get to that level. And those things can only happen over time. Didn't work on her. She gave me an ultimatum. She was like, either put me in that job or I'm going to leave. And I told her, I really want you to stay. I actually think it'll be great for you to learn from a professional who can teach you things about media. I can't. I mean, I can manage a media director, but I'm not a media professional. And you're just not quite ready for this job. But there's time. She left. She joined a small local startup in Arizona. They gave her the title she wanted. She was media director. But in actuality, the job she left and went to was much smaller in every way to the job she had at LifeLock. And 6 months later, the company ran into difficulties and she was let go. So, like I said, be honest with yourself about how much you're contributing. And then you don't want to be too mature, premature, because it can potentially be just as bad to leave a job early than to stay too long. Now, on the other hand, well, I would never encourage anyone to be insubordinate. Sometimes you may need to speak up for yourself because the organization will keep taking from you and keep pushing from you until you say something. Now, here's an example when I felt the disrespect was valid. As I mentioned, when I joined LifeLock as Chief Sales and Marketing Officer, it was a startup company preparing to go public. via an initial public offering, which is commonly referred to as IPO. Now, the IPO process is brutal. It's comprehensive, in-depth, at times overwhelming, and it can take months and sometimes even years. So the key vehicle in the filing process is what's known as the S-1 form. This document's filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, by companies that are planning to make a new public offering of securities, okay? And the purpose of the document is to provide transparency to potential investors so they know what they're potentially buying. It outlines all the information and every aspect of the company so that any potential investor can make an informed decision. And the form is not just submitted once. There's an initial submission, and then there are multiple revisions before it's finally approved and finalized. And then the company is granted the right to go forward with their initial public offering. Well, one section of the S1 addresses executive compensation, where the company is required to list the names of the most highly compensated executives and their compensation packages. And apparently, it was surprising to the LifeLock organization and to my fellow executives that I was listed as the second highest compensated employee in the company, only behind the CEO. I knew that might be a problem or an issue for some of my peers, but I didn't worry about it because, frankly, it wasn't my problem. So a few weeks later, as we're nearing the end of the IPO process, one of my team members comes in and says, "Hey, did you look at the last revision of the S1? Last one before they finalized it?" I said, "No, I haven't looked at the last couple of revisions because by the time you get to the end, all they're really doing is updating, financial numbers. And so, no, I didn't look at it." He's like, "Well, I think you ought to look at it, especially the executive compensation section." I said, "Okay, let me go look at it." I looked at it, and here's what I found. In the last submission, my CEO had gone in and changed the salaries of some of the executives. Specifically, he had increased the salary of the chief financial officer and the chief legal officer to a level that was above me. And then to keep it straight, he also increased his own salary. Now, I know what happened. As soon as it came out, I'm sure they were in his office going, "I can't believe that we are making less than the marketing guy." And I'm sure there was complaints, and he finally just said, "Okay, I'll fix it." So I saw it. I didn't feel great about it, but I really liked the job, really liked the company, and I decided to let it go. I didn't say anything about it. I didn't say anything to my CEO about it. I just let it go. So that was in September. Also that month, LifeLock had hired a new president, Gail. And the reason they hired the new president because the founder and current CEO really wasn't prepared or desired to be the CEO of a publicly traded company, and everybody knew that. So as soon as she came in, I immediately started reporting to her. And then the next month, October, we had a successful IPO, New York Stock Exchange, ring the bell, do the goofy clap and whatever. I mentioned the S1, and since we were a marketing-driven company, I was one of the primary authors of the S1. There were a lot of contributors, don't get me wrong, but a big part of the compelling case was how successful we were in marketing, and that was a big part of the pitch in trying to convince people to invest in the company. So when January comes around, I received my performance review, and I was shocked, okay? My performance was evaluated as average. And even more importantly, because of only having an average performance, the recommendation was that I should get no salary increase, no merit increase for the upcoming year. I was livid. I felt blindsided. I felt disrespected. So the question was, can I let this one go? And I couldn't. And also realized, given Gail's brief tenure, this evaluation really had to come from my CEO and not from my then boss, who had only been there 3 months. So I confronted him. I couldn't let it go. How could you possibly say I had an average year? We just had our first earnings call, and as a public company, and almost nearly all the points made were referencing the efforts and results that came from my team. And now you don't want to give me a pay raise? And by the way, it wasn't just about the money. It wasn't about the money. It's when you get to the executive level, salary is a small portion of your overall compensation package. It was about being respected and being paid fairly relative to my peers. And I kept going. I was like, look, so then I did go back to September. I said, look, I didn't say anything when you backdoored me in September and went in and raised, the salaries for you, Michael, and Sharon. But this is ridiculous. So, so since we're there, why did you increase y'all's salaries back in September and you left mine where it was? And he had an answer. He said, well, we did a market salary analysis to see if we were paying our executive team fairly. And those were kind of the results, and those were the results and actions that, came from that analysis. I said, okay, let me get this straight. You did a market analysis, and what it told you were the three of you were underpaid and that I was overpaid. He's like, well, that's what the analysis said. I said, okay, try this one. If you and me and Michael and Sharon left the company, went into the marketplace looking for new jobs, who would command the highest salary? And he thought about it. He was like, you would. I said, exactly. That's why this is such bullshit. So then he tried to calm me down. And he was like, look, you got to get past this, man. I mean, I know you're upset. I know you feel disrespected, but you got to get past this, because if you can't get past this, this thing here with us is not going to work. I agree with you. If I can't get past this, this is not going to work. He's like, so what are you going to do? I'll tell you what I'm going to do. This was a Thursday morning. I'm going to go home right now. And my wife and I are going to pack bags and we're going to drive to Santa Monica for the weekend. And I'm going to spend some time on the beach thinking about this, getting my thoughts and opinions together. And I'll come back next week and I'll let you know. So that's what I did. And I came back next week and I came into his office. It was either Monday or Tuesday. I don't know how long I was gone. He said, where'd you come out? I can't get past it. I mean, I tried, but I got to tell you, I can't get past it. And I don't know if I can fully be 100% committed because of how I feel about what has happened over the last 4 months. He's like, okay. So what? You want us to put together a package or something? I'm like, yeah, put something together. A few days later, I get called in. Gail called me in because, again, she was my boss, to present me with a separation package offer. And I'm still angry. I've been angry for a week. And I was angry when I came to that meeting and I was ready for a confrontation over it. And so then she presents the package to me. And I got to tell you, it was so much more money than I would have asked for that I had a hard time keeping a straight face. I was like, okay. Well, thank you for putting this together. I'll go home and we'll discuss it and I'll let you know tomorrow. So I came back in and said, okay, this is fine. And I agreed that I would stay on until they hired a new CMO, that I would actually help them look for a CMO. And they only had one request for me. They wanted me to be the one to tell the company I was leaving. Because when Gail first came in, she was cutting executives left and right. I mean, I think she fired 3 people in the first 2 weeks. But she didn't want this to be on her hit list. And so I was like, fine. We had a thing every Thursday called Thoughtful Thursday where the executive team would speak to the whole organization. And I told them I was leaving because I was looking for a greater opportunity. I didn't tell them what was going on. I left it favorable because I will say this. I have never burned a bridge. No matter how ugly it is when I left an organization, there's no upside in burning a bridge because the world is small. Wherever you go, people are going to check on references. And if you don't burn a bridge and you left on good terms, the worst they'll say about you is nothing, but very likely they'll say very good things about you. But despite the favorable package, I really want you to know this was a really tough decision for me. The 4 years I spent at LifeLock were the most enjoyable 4 years of my career. We did great things. We built a great business and we had so much fun. And I loved living in Scottsdale, Arizona. But even with all that, every person has to know their breaking point. How important is it to maintain your pride and self-respect? And you could argue I was being ridiculously prideful and I should have gotten over it. But just like for me, the same for you. No one can tell you where your limit is. Nobody can tell you what you should have to put up with. And don't let anyone tell you that. You're the one that have to live with yourself and look yourself in the mirror. And then you make decisions based on what you know your limit to be. So I said at the very beginning, it's not that simple of like people leave. And I talked about the people who are not happy with their jobs, but they choose to stay. And so why do they stay? Well, not surprisingly, the first reason is financial. Okay. So people need a check. And so unless they have something guaranteed, they can't afford just to walk out with pride and then have no way to live. Another reason is emotional ties. You spend more time at work with your coworkers than you spend with anybody else. And you spend with your family, your spouse, your kids, your church. You spend a lot of time there. And a lot of times people develop bonds and there's value to that. That's also a really important part of your job satisfaction is, liking the peers that you work with. Another reason people say it could be convenience. Maybe the job is not something where they're trying to be CEO. It just allows you to have the lifestyle you want. It could be close to work. Maybe it's not that demanding. Maybe they give you flexible hours. They allow you to do the things you want to do. And there's a value to that. Okay. There's a value to that. And those are all very good reasons. And it's not at all uncommon for work-life balance to be a bigger factor than advancement. Okay. Or satisfaction. Again, I would never tell people what choice to make, but I will always say, make sure you know why you make the choices you make. Okay, let's get to today's American history fun fact. The World Trade Center in New York opened in 1972 as the tallest building in the world. And that had just surpassed the Empire State Building, which had been the tallest building in the world for 40 years. The World Trade Center groundbreaking began in August of 66 and completed in July of 71, so 5 years. But what's interesting is the Empire State Building was built in 1930. Well, construction began in 1930. And you know when it was completed? 1931. 13 and a half months from the first groundbreaking to putting the antenna on the top of the building took 13 and a half months. That's incredible. So how was this engineering marvel accomplished? Well, you have to understand, in 1931, there was no Department of Labor. There was no OSHA. There were no standards on labor practices, how many hours people could work, safety regulations. So the crew who built the Empire State Building was in 2 12-hour shifts, like 1,700 workers per shift. They worked around the clock for 13 and a half months. They wanted to eliminate any wasted time, so they built cafes and cafeterias on the completed floors. They put in temporary water spouts so people didn't have to leave to go get water. They didn't want them wasting any time other than completing the building. And so again, 13 and a half months to build the Empire State Building that stood as the tallest building from 1931 to 1971. Incredible. All right, so that's all I have today for the Ruthless Truth. Thanks again for listening. If you want to engage, feel free to subscribe, share, like, recommend. You can engage on social media at TruthDavis5 on Instagram. The Facebook page is Ruthless Truth, and soon to come, the website, truthdavis.com. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you again soon.